People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
Okay, so how dare the adults take her seriously? And they did. That was 6 years ago, and you've seen what she's been doing since. But for over 50 years now, the doom and gloom of how a changing climate poses a grave and immediate danger has been yelled at by the left. Worldwide famine, lack of oxygen, extremely hot temperatures, extinction of 80% of all living creatures, including humans. Those were the goodies the so-called experts and media have been feeding us. Well, here's an inconvenient truth to Al Gore and the others. Assuming the climate is changing in a negative way, we can debate the causes and effects, but we know it's nowhere near the emergency that they pretend that it is. This week, the prestigious journal Nature retracted a study that found climate change would cause far more economic damage by the end of the century than previous estimates. It seems they got their data wrong. You know, junk in, junk out. For more on this, we bring in the executive editor of ClimateDepot.com, Mark Morano. So, Mark, you know, Nature, it retracted last year's study that predicted climate change would just completely wreak havoc on the global economy, and only trillions of dollars in the leftist agenda items, the goodie bag, could save us, like, you know, banning fossil fuels, all this stuff. Were you surprised about this study being retracted?
No. First off, this study in the journal Nature called The Economic Commitment to Climate Change was the #2 media-cited study on climate change since it was released in 2024. And what's fascinating is immediately upon release, this study was attacked by scientists around the world, skeptical scientists and independent scientists saying this is absolute crap from top to bottom. And one of the biggest complaints was of the extreme modeling scenarios. They use this computer code called RCP 8.5, which is kind of like an extreme scenario of everything it looks at so you can get juiced headlines and scare the public. Well, the journal Nature was inundated with all kinds of corrections, information, data, reassessment. They went to the original authors and said, hey, can you issue a correction to this paper? And they said, no, there's too much wrong with it. So they fully retracted the paper. So no, anyone who follows the climate debate was not surprised. Now, you have people like the Associated Press, Seth Bornstein, their top climate reporter. He came out and said, this is a tiny change, just a tiny retract. Pay no attention over here.
Right.
Associated Press has received $8 million from nonprofits to fund their climate desk coverage. So they're bought and paid for by the climate activists.
That's how the game works. That's exactly how the game works. They come up with these ridiculous studies paid for by whomever on the left, and then the media, they run with it. And that's the cycle, rinse and repeat. And if you're a climate denier, you know, then you don't go to the cocktail parties.
And real quick, it was in the Biden administration, the Congressional Budget Office and the World Bank used this now retracted study. They loved it. It was all about, we need restrictions on every aspect of our life because this study says we're doomed.
That's right.
Oh, we retracted the study. Never mind. Move on. Nothing to see.
But we'll keep those bad policies anyway. So you speaking of the Biden administration, 4 years ago, they declared climate change as a national security issue. Yes. And then, of course, 2 weeks ago, there was another article published saying that climate change is going to make you poorer. I mean, it's an endless cycle of this hysteria. And then you get wackos like that who, you know, their whole life is upended because they think the end of the earth is tomorrow.
Yes. And first of all, on the national security front, climate change they've been trying to say it's a national security issue. You had the World Bank, the World Health Organization say it's an existential threat to public health. You have the Pentagon under Biden saying it's a threat to national security. The bottom line when it comes to national security and in wars, if you go back, and the Center for Strategic International Studies did a study on climate, and they found that warm periods, it used to be called the medieval climate optimum, that was the medieval warm period, were the time of lowest conflict in wars and human fighting. Why? Because you have record crop production, you have booming economies, you have everyone flourishing during warm times. When was there a national security threat? During cold times. That's when you had crop failures, food shortages, resource scarcity. So they have it. I don't want to curse on your show, but they have it bleep backwards. That it's a cooling and cold is what we should be afraid of when it comes to national security. And economically, if you look at the warming we've had since 1850, which has also coincided with thermometer data coming out of the Little Ice Age, we've had unprecedented economic growth, the second half of the Industrial Revolution, booming growth, lowering the greatest liberation of mankind in the history of our planet with fossil fuels. And all this coincided with a warming trend of the 20th century into the 21st century. We've never seen the economy better. So the idea that climate change is going to harm the economy, there's no empirical data to support that. Now, they can come up with extreme climate scare computer models and do anything they want.
Yeah, which is what they do. Mark, I appreciate you coming on. ClimateDepot.com. I love the website, by the way. It's just like it's like a fork right in their eye. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate it.